Beautiful.
Okay, perfect.
How are you today? We can just begin a little bit off the conversation. Yeah.
I'm actually coming out of dengue fever, to be truly
Okay.
honest. Yeah,
Wow.
I was on an expedition in Ecuador that
Uh-huh.
ended last week, and
Mm.
just like got home, started feeling really ill, and another team member was really ill. Turns out we got dengue fever, and I'm sort of reviving, but it's good. I'm over it. It was mild. It was, yeah, but it's part of the job.
Have you had a lot of experiences like that, picking something up when you're doing these big expeditions? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in tropical areas, it's
Yeah.
sort of pretty normal.
Hmm.
I've had Zika virus. Yeah,
Oh
I've
my
had quite
gosh.
a few of those things.
Hmm.
But dengue was definitely, it's definitely a bizarre one. It's like
Huh.
very just like takes over the whole body, hurts the eyes, and but I'm definitely better now. So I'm very grateful to be better from my dengue.
Well, I'm honored you're here. Yeah, I had a friend who had dengue recently, and she said it was like being on a trip, that it was like a
No,
psychedelic
yeah,
experience, very intense. Um,
it can get intense, but I'm glad I'm over it now, and it was well worth it. It was an amazing expedition,
yeah, I saw
probably
you
one of
were
the best
just,
of my life.
was this the one you were doing with Robert McFarlane and Cosmo
Yeah,
Sheldrake? Yeah, that looked
Cosmo.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Both Rob and I came down with it. Cosmo's fine, so
Some people
happy
just
for
are
him.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So,
Yeah,
um, I'm up to I'm willing for this to go wherever you want it to go. I have lots of questions for you, and I figure we can go 45 minutes to an hour, however long your energy lasts for, whatever feels correct. But yeah, I'm
let's do
wondering if
it.
there's anything you
I'm
want to
with you.
cover or you want to do in particular. So I want to ask about like, okay, all right,
We'll
amazing.
just let's do it. I'm happy. Yeah.
Okay, so I've listened to all of your interviews. Okay, so I'm gonna pause. We will edit this. Hello, Giuliana. It is lovely to have you here today. I've
Hello.
admired your work for so long. I am a mycophile, and I think of you as being the spokesperson for the queendom. Um, and I've heard this story many times, but I'd love to hear it again today, especially because this course is about widening our idea of what stories are and whether or not they belong to human beings and who they are in service for. So I'd love to hear the story of how you became inoculated with fungi, how you inhaled the spores.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't really a choice. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that I chose to pursue, but rather an encounter in a forest when I was very young that provoked an overwhelming certainty that I was born to serve the kingdom or queendom of the fungi.
Yeah.
Um, it was never something that I thought I would want to do. I was content working with ocean conservation, sort of in my head, thinking that I would be doing something for oceans or with water, and it was just that encounter that changed the whole trajectory of my life. Together with some experiences that really taught me that being at service and being a good person was the way to go in life, and I decided I'd put that at the forefront of everything I did. So it was basically, as I like to think, I was chosen by them and not me choosing them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're working on in this course, that we all have mentors that we need to, find. And they're usually not going to be human beings. They're going to be other species that will choose us.
Yeah.
And we have to get good at listening to that. So was there a specific encounter? I think I remember there was one mushroom that you encountered, and then you realized that there were no guidebooks in Chile, and you wrote your own. You were the first to do it, right? Will you walk us through the
Right.
kind of bravery it
Right.
took
So
to break that ground? Literally break that ground?
yeah, yeah. So I was actually looking for a fox in a forest. I wanted to collect the scat of the fox, and I wanted
Uh-huh,
to track the fox using radio telemetry. And it was just a volunteer position
uh-huh,
that I saw, promoted in university. And it was on that trip, walking around the forest, looking for scat and looking for the foxes, that I saw a huge orange mushroom on a tree stump, and I really wanted to know who she was. I was really intrigued and wanted to just say hi and understand. And I started looking for any reference of mushrooms of Chile, let alone fungi, but yeah, mushrooms. And I couldn't find anything. And it was at that moment that I just got this really overwhelming, like a lightning bolt, like just a life jolt that was like, this is what you have to do. And I just thought I was diving into studying, buying books online, getting them sent to Chile, and just devouring everything I could find in matter of books all over the world. So I would just like look through field guides, read mycological textbooks, and then I got an offer to travel and document the fungi of Chile. And it was on that trip that I collected all the material that allowed me to, while I was breastfeeding my son, write my first field guide, which was the first field guide to Chilean mushrooms, with the mushrooms in their habitat. In that interim between my first jolt and publishing my field guide, there was one published, a very old book that but didn't show the mushrooms really where and how they grew. So ultimately becoming a mother, and just the process of breastfeeding got me through writing the whole book and publishing it. And it was a very beautiful and nourishing experience, just going back to every encounter and transmitting that energy also to my son. Yeah.
There's so many different ways in right here. I mean, I want to approach, looking at fungi as always being environmentally embedded, and how crucial it is showing them in their environment, because you can't understand them when they're deracinated. But I also want to think about, mycological studies have been underappreciated. They haven't been given center stage. They're not even included in most conservation attempts. What was it about being a mother, being a woman in science, that perhaps opened you up to a species that hadn't been acknowledged and hadn't been uplifted? Like, was there a certain kind of feminist standpoint that informed your interest or enlivened it?
Well, I'm the daughter of a refugee, and I was born during her exile. And there's always been a very strong sense of justice, and a very strong awareness of when justice isn't done in my house and in my upbringing and my family. But with the fungi, this whole kingdom or queendom of life, it didn't come from there. It didn't come from a sense of injustice, although during my career and my work, a sense of injustice has started to drive a lot of what I do. But it really did come from a holistic, essential, vocation. I would say vocational, where I really do feel that it's what I was born to do on this earth at this time. I've tried to do other things repeatedly, and it's just impossible. It's like it's not that there were times when I was trying to let it go on a side, and it really is inseparable from my existence. And that doesn't really have to do with any sense of justice or of choice.
I love that. I oftentimes think you've found your vocation when it's like the cordyceps taking over the ant. When you feel like you become the ant infected, you're just going to be in service to something else, and you'll never get the full story. So I would love if you would speak, because I think a lot of the audience won't necessarily have a baseline understanding of the difference between mushrooms and fungi. So could you talk a little bit about how fungi are different than plants and animals? And then I would really like you to expand on how you can't separate fungi from their environment, how they are in and digesting their environment, making it. Yeah, I would love it if you would speak to that. Thank you.
Sure. So as a species, humans have decided to communicate about life on Earth and organisms on Earth through a convention that is based on the separation of living beings, based on the type of cell they have, and on how they obtain energy. And in that convention, we've structured in the Linnaean system a way of naming species, a way of putting them together based on their relationships now, with more molecular work plugged into that Linnaean system. And so what we see is that there's an agreement, more or less, of having 5 kingdoms. And I don't say kingdoms with a G. I drop the G. It's kingdom.
I love that.
Because
Huh.
it's really,
Yeah.
yeah, a kingdom.
Kingdom.
And so there are more or less, I mean, it could be 5, 6, 7 kingdoms of life. In the 5 kingdom structure, we have the animals, animalia kingdom, plantae, which are the plants,
Yeah.
fungi kingdom, monera, which are bacterias, rickettsias, others, protist or protoctista, another, which is another kingdom. Now, 4 of these, animals, plants, fungi, and protists, have a eukaryote cell, so a cell that has a defined nucleus. And one, monera, the monera kingdom, has a prokaryotic cell, which is what we call, of course, a primitive cell, because we have the evolved cell, we think. That doesn't have a defined nucleus, and that's where the bacteria and others are. Now, among plants, animals, and fungi and protists, which are these eukaryotic celled organisms, there are differences in cell wall structure or having a cell membrane and how you get your energy. So plants have a eukaryotic cell with a cellulose wall, and they obtain energy through photosynthesis. Animals have a eukaryotic cell with a cell membrane. They don't have a cell wall, cell membrane, which is different. And we obtain our energy through ingestion. Fungi have a cell wall made out of chitin. It's not cellulose like plants, and it's not a membrane like animals. It's a cell wall made out of chitin. And what fungi do is secrete enzymes out into the environment, which is their food. Fungi live inside their food. They digest outside their body, and then they absorb the nutrients back in. Now, just like in plants, there are a huge variety of organisms, from ferns, moss, trees, shrubs, palms. We can talk about so many of them. And in animals, imagine how many we have. We have, mammals, vertebrates, we've got birds. It's so many different categories, Inside the kingdom of the fungi, there are many too. So inside the fungi are yeasts, which are unicellular, molds, mushrooms, conchs, lichens, and millions of microscopic organisms of other big groups inside the kingdom. And just to illustrate how diverse it can be, a morel mushroom and an oyster mushroom are as closely related as a whale and a worm. So both whales and worms are animals, and both morels and oysters are fungi, but they're just not closely related inside this kingdom of life. In this kingdom, what we normally see is that there are some features of the life of the organisms inside fungi that can be grouped in 2 or 3 groups. So you have decomposers, you have symbionts, so organisms that form a symbiosis with other organisms, also from other kingdoms, and form a new body, a new organism. And those are basically the 2 big habits that we see. And then the fact of fermentation comes from decomposition a bit. Some people group fermentation differently. So these organisms, all the fungi, are extremely diverse. They're as big a group as plants or animals, or even bigger in terms of number of species. And they are organisms that cannot live without another in such an evident way, that they live inside their food and that they form symbiosis with other organisms, that they are living beings that really, really make apparent how no individual really exists, how every one of us depends on another.
Yeah, that's the most beautiful part about it, that they really complicate our idea of a self. I've also heard you use an amazing metaphor of the egg and the cake. And about how they're the sticky connective tissue of ecosystems. Yeah, I was wondering, so now,
so inside the kingdom, not all mushrooms form mycelium, for example. No, sorry, that was wrong. No, not all fungi form mycelium. All mushrooms do. Most mushrooms have mycelium, but not all fungi. So mushrooms are just one type of fungus, of one type of fungus inside this kingdom. Yeasts are another type of fungus inside this kingdom. You know, lichens are another type of fungus. So, you know, there's a huge difference. So when we say mushroom, in regards to the kingdom of the fungi, it's like saying bird in relation to the kingdom of the animals.
Yeah, and this is something I'm thinking about a lot, which is on the one side, it's amazing that fungi are getting more popular and people are paying more attention to them. On the other hand, there's this monolithic fiction of fungi as having one behavior and one story. And I was wondering if you could talk about the many different fungal stories and how there's a biodiversity of different behaviors and strategies that they employ, and how we need to honor that as we move forward and not just focus on like Amanita muscaria and, you know, mycorrhizal fungi.
Yeah. Oh, there are fungi that can live with an organism and provide service of survival, for example, to animals. Not to go too far, herbivores can't digest the plants they eat in their gut without a fungus that breaks down the cellulose cell wall of the grass they eat, because animals can't do that by themselves.
Yeah.
There's a form of symbiosis and a group of fungi that do that. They don't form mushrooms. They don't, you know, they're microscopic fungi. There are some organisms inside the kingdom of the fungi that are essential for seeds to germinate, for example. In the case of orchids, orchids don't exist without fungi. The orchids cannot germinate without the fungi that allow for them to be able to begin their life. And everywhere you look, every organism has a fungal component that is sustaining them. I mean, I like to say, and I truly believe that they are the firmament of life on Earth. They are the basal organisms that provide the possibility for plants and animals to live. And they also have a very tight relationship with microorganisms. The most potent antibacterials in the world are all produced by fungi. They are bioengineers, let's say, if we want to call them something anthropological. They are bioengineers of nature. They respond to their environment by crafting chemicals and survival techniques that are unique, you know, on Earth, and they really are the big adapters in environment, and they also can change very quickly, and you can find, you know, the same species in different forms depending on what stage of life they are. So it's like, you know, you can find fungi that are reproducing sexually that are completely different from the same species reproducing asexually. And then when they're in just this like chilled out phase of their life, when they're not reproducing, they're completely different as well. So they are very complex, and there's not one attribute that could be given to the whole kingdom. They are as complex as animals and plants, and even maybe more.
Yeah. I was wondering, so I'm guessing that you were figuring out this stuff at a time when a lot of other people were not aware of all of this information and these ideas that we are holobionts. And how I was wondering what it was like to begin to digest and to let yourself be digested by these concepts in your own life, in your own science.
It took going against all social expectations, almost all like family expectations. It really was doing something that nobody had ever done before, but with such a certainty, such a personal certainty that it even was bordering, you know, what we would commonly attribute to sanity. I mean, it was just complete obsession, completely obsessed, you know, living and breathing and studying them, you know, all the time, and really also what some people would call sacrifice, which I actually do not call sacrifice, but I did, you know, there were choices made that were detrimental to my immediate well-being, because I had such a big certainty that this is what I was born to do, and that these organisms really needed to be acknowledged and understood. And then it was teaming up with other people and meeting other people, like, Paul Stamets, who I met, 20 years ago or more, and some other, but not many of us who felt the same thing. And I think in a way, I would feed off them, like feed off the fact that, oh, maybe I'm not just completely alone and I'm not going completely crazy here. And then just start deliberately building this. And I was looking back at the foundation goals 10 years ago, and the goals were, from here to 10 years, fungi are acknowledged worldwide in the mainstream, and we would work towards that. So I feel very proud of living this moment of a fungal awakening. And I also know and really am proud of the fact that we played a deliberate part in making that happen. And it's also quite curious to now be in a world where you don't have to spend, 2 days explaining something, fungal, and where people just come up to you like, I get it now, and it's a beautiful awakening that really just raises the bar and the platform from which you can build and sort of continue building fungal love, fungal appreciation, and fungal,
Yeah, and I'm wondering, it's amazing to see what the foundation has accomplished and the kind of education that it's offering now. And I'm wondering what the process was of putting it together. I'm especially interested in hearing you talk about including fungi in conservation assessments, especially because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they underpin the biodiversity and the health of all ecosystems. So if you're not taking them into consideration, you're not really understanding anything about how an ecosystem is working.
Right. So it was a strategic decision to get involved in fungal conservation, basically given a set of opportunities. Yeah. So in Chile, the legislation, the constitutional law that protects the environment was being opened for discussion, and there was an opportunity there to put in any topic one wanted. And at the same time, a group of scientists had been working to get, some recommendations from IUCN to include fungi, and there was the discipline of fungal conservation was starting to pick up, and I had been trained. I've always worked in NGOs. I've never worked in a for-profit company. I've always been in the non-profit and the conservation sector, and I'd learned some of the tricks of the trade working in marine conservation. And so there was a moment where I realized that there were opportunities to advocate for fungal conservation, but that required forming a nonprofit, building a team, and just dedicating my life to fungi and pushing this forward. And that was a really important moment. That was 12 years ago, and that gave way to some really important policy changes in Chile that have influenced the world, and now some very important international policy changes that will be influencing different countries around the world. So it was a vision, and it was something that wasn't expected, and that I had to use the beautiful attributes of fungi. I had to use, the charismatic data that they carry. So many data that they carry, like just the people are important, from beer, wine, bread, chocolate, coffee. You could start, depending on who you're talking to, crafting just a path towards fungal love, that once you feel it and you have it, you can't let go, and then you're just constantly thinking, and then really crafting the language. After many years, I realized that we had a language problem. So that's when I started crafting the idea of delimiting a word that would further fungal conservation, fungal education, and just basically fungal love, by creating a word and adding it to a known phrase and just pushing that through the system with a trickle-down effect, where you get the wording in place of, at the right piece of legislation, and that will trickle down into all regulation. And that's really been the deliberate move that we've been sort of impulsing for the last 5 years. And the term is funga, which refers to the fungal diversity of a given place, because we were all talking about fauna and flora. And fauna is the, the animal diversity of a given place. Flora is the plant diversity of a given place. But the fungi weren't included, and so that was just a very pivotal moment when I just feeling empowered to be able to propose new language to include them. That's where I felt, I truly feel its service for these organisms just by daring to do these things. Yeah.
It's very inspiring because I think a lot of people think that to be in service for another species, you have to act like them, but you actually have to, insert yourself back into the politics and the language and salvage what you can and make do with the language you have available. And I think that I'm very impressed by the ways in which you've made compromises, you've talked to many different people, and you've really just you've brought fungi to the public attention in every way possible. It's very inspiring to see the way you've become.
It's also because it's not a species, it's a whole kingdom.
Yeah.
And so, I would never, ever dare to even suggest to myself that I would speak for them. What happens with me is just a complete sentiment of commitment to others having a broader understanding and appreciation and love for them, but never with the pretension of representing them or speaking for them. I find that disturbing when that's put on me, like, oh, I'm not. I'm I'm a servant of their what I think would be good for them. It's even worse, like it's really just daring.
Yeah. So there's something that I'm very compelled to in your work, which is this idea of protecting death, the process of death and decay. And we live in a culture that's very good at ignoring death and pretending like we can offload our waste onto other communities and they can take care of it. And fungi seem to me to really complicate that idea. And so I was wondering if you could talk about why decomposition is so important and how fungi facilitate that.
Well, we tend to think that death is an end, and that that from death, nothing else continues to happen. And ultimately, what the fungi teach you is that literally the death of one life form is nothing other than the birth of many other life forms. So, I even invite, and death, I mean, death in terms of, an end or something that we think no longer lives. So a body, scat, just a fallen branch, fallen leaves. But I invite everybody to take a close look. I mean, if you're walking, especially now in the US at this moment, going into fall and winter, you'll be seeing a lot of dead plants. You'll be seeing a lot of dead animals. Or animal waste. Waste is always looked at also as something dead, something at the end. But if you take a close look, what you can see it. You can see life emerging from what we were taught is something that is an end, and fungi thrive on them, and fungi transform, the mechanics of how cells compose through the process of decomposition. And in that disarming of that mechanical structure, they're leaving building blocks available, in forms of elements and others for life to reconform in another way. So I guess it's about putting yourself in a different position of a cycle and starting life from any position of the cycle. And you should be able to start life at the part of the cycle that we were taught is the end. In a cycle, there is no end. So that's been really like a big eye-opener and a big invitation that the fungi have made to me to communicate as well, is just how important it is for decomposition to do its thing. In that process, really important chemicals are made. And I think it's important for people to understand that, as something decomposes, it ferments. And first, when fungi are involved, initially it starts with fermenting. Imagine what fermentation has done for the world, let alone humanity.
Yeah.
And that's all part of what we would traditionally call rot. You know, it's the first phase of rot. So it's a bit, you have to sort of open your mind and try to understand that that nothing really ends in nature. It transforms. Yeah.
So I know that you've been doing some expeditions and you've also been working with, are you on the board of Spun Underground? Do you work with, you work with Spun Underground, right?
I'm on the advisory board, yeah.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you could talk to us about what, how they're trying to map the underground systems. And one of the questions I have is, as we begin to find out more about fungi and map these systems, how can we protect them rather than commodify them?
Yeah. So what SPUN is doing is sampling soil around the world to understand what fungal communities that live associated with plants live there. So and that's done through looking at different types of soil. So there's an algorithm that predicts high diversity in some places and low diversity in others. And the plan is to sample, you know, all over the place. What that will give us is an understanding of the fungal communities that, you know, the mycorrhizal communities, so fungi that live associated with plants that live around the world and how they've been affected by land degradation, fragmentation, and also a baseline to see what's going to happen with them in the future. Now, I would say that in terms of commodifying fungi, they're pretty commodified already in different parts of the world, you know, from antibiotics with big pharma to using fungi in, you know, mining processes to extract the biggest amount of metal from a rock.
Wait, tell
You know,
me about that. I'm curious about that. I didn't know.
biolixiviation.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're used in several
Yeah.
industrial processes. You imagine in pulp and paper production. I mean, you
Huh.
have to decompose the lignin or the cellulose, and that's done with
Fascinating.
specific fungi that do that. So and even just in forestry in general, forestry industry, if you don't put the right mycorrhizal fungi on your, you know, your pine sapling, it won't grow. So that, you know, there's a whole market for mycorrhizal fungi and inoculated saplings. But through the SPUN project, I don't feel that there would be a danger of commodification of the results of that study, because what we're going to be looking at, and what we're looking at, is the fungal communities that sustain soil, which sustains the rest of, you know, terrestrial life. Yeah.
That's fascinating. No, I mean, it's interesting to think we've always been collaborating with fungi. How do we keep collaborating rather than, I mean, it would be interesting to hear you talk about the psychedelic movement. And I know that you've done a lot of work with the Mazatec community and really protecting these ancestral stories and this heritage. And it seems like Fungi Foundation is pretty ethical about the way they do this work. And I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so we have a program at the foundation called the Elders Program.
Yeah.
And the Elders Program has three sort of big, you know, goals and projects. And one of the projects is to understand how policies that protect fungi can protect old growth forest around the world. That's one. So protecting old trees with a fungal argument. The second one is to uncover, at least internally for now, and there's a whole, you know, issue I'll get to there. It's basically understanding the ancestral relationships between fungi and humanity. So we've documented hundreds of uses over, you know, dozens of communities around the world, and we can see patterns of the same species or same genera of fungi being used across the world for the same use, having evolved culturally independently. So, you know, indigenous peoples in Australia, Colombia, and the US, you know, in Scandinavia, finding the same relationship and the same use of a similar type of fungus, excuse me, you know, in different moments in time without ever communicating. And so what we see there are nature-based solutions, fungal-based solutions of the past that are really important as we move forward in the world as it is now. You know, a lot of people think that, you know, mushroom leather is something new. It really isn't. It's been made for hundreds of years in Eastern Europe, you know, and you see Paul Stamets with his, you know, Romanian hat on. It's very old. It's not Mycoworks or you know, or Bolt Threads or these incredible companies that are making this more massive. It's not them that made that. That was an ancestral one, you know.
Yeah.
And then the third one is we've teamed with a family in Huautla de Jimenez to save an archive that holds ancestral knowledge of the Mazatecs and artifacts and objects and descriptions. And that was really a calling that came upon me. It was not something that we looked to do. It wasn't part of our formal plan. But after a very magical encounter with a family there, it was really just like as if being chosen to do that, to help guard and save that archive. And so the project Historia y Memorias Mazatecas, so history and memory, Mazatec history and memory, is a project where we assist the Garcia family in protecting an archive that their father built and exhibiting it and curating it and ultimately preserving it. So it's a beautiful calling, but it all has to, and you know, in all of this, you know, people who follow the foundation's work can't really find much of the information because we developed ethical guidelines around our work with ethnomycology. And we did that. It's really, I think, the first mycological ethical guidelines, and that we're going to publish them very soon. But it was a joint work with ethnomycologists and ethnobotanists. We have an incredible ethnobotanist on the board of directors, Nancy Turner. She's from the Pacific Northwest. And we don't feel that we are in a position to share information, even if it's published. You know, we did fast track that knowledge being found, and we would not want to provoke any strife to communities, like, for example, what happened with quinoa in Peru, where communities can't even afford their quinoa anymore because it's such a huge, you know, product to export. So we're very calm about that, and just we feel we know our place in asking communities whether they want our participation in trying to do something for those species or not, but in a private conversation, and then, you know, moving forward privately and just very low key.
Yeah, I've been really impressed by the ways in which you have handled that work. So thank you for doing that. I do have just a question I've always wanted to ask you, which is, you know, there's in the popular conception, there's the mother tree, you know, and the fungi are kind of seen as like tubing or wires that just like carry the messages. And I'm wondering if is there an alternative to the phytocentric perspective? What is your feeling about the mother tree? Or is it really a mother mycelial system? How do we begin to understand the idea of the wood wide web in a more complicated, nuanced way?
Yeah, so the wood wide web would be made of a type of fungus.
Yeah.
Of the mushroom forming fungi.
Yeah.
There are so many other types of fungi. But if you ask me, plants are the photosynthetic symbiont of fungi, and not the other way around. I mean, it all depends where you're standing from. So for botanists and plant-centric people, fungi are assisting and are there for plants to live.
Yeah.
I don't exactly, you know, turn that round to say that, oh, plants are there for fungi to exist, but I do see it from a fungal perspective. And in that perspective, you know, plants are the sugar producing symbiont of a fungus. And we know that there are fungi that are as old as some of the oldest trees we know. And it's one organism. So I think that what we're doing with Spun and what Spun is doing as an organization will unveil a lot of this sort of myco-blindness, and will reveal, you know, how plant-centric we are. But ultimately, if somebody wants to protect fungi thinking that they're important for the mother tree, I think all roads lead to Rome. And if it leads to fungal conservation, then in my view, it's most welcome at this moment. Yeah,
that's a fantastic answer. So are there fungal perspectives that you have looked into as you have, had relationships and dialogues with these different species that have helped you look on a more macroscopic level at the climate change and environmental issues? And can you share any of those with us today?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I have, for example, I'll give an example. There's a mushroom called Amanita galactica, which I encountered in 2014 and had the honor of naming. During the process of naming that fungus, I had to study a bit more about it and do some molecular work and understand if it was known before and maybe how old it was. Well, it turns out that Amanita galactica was around before the continents drifted. It's a Gondwanic species, so more than 160 million years ago, before the southern hemisphere was as we know it, right? This species existed on Earth. And so they really do give you some perspectives on time. There are 50 glaciations that we know of, and so ecological time and the kairos, so the time of a process, for me is a fundamental teaching from the fungi. And I tend to not try to understand any crisis in a chronological time. This chronological time that we've auto-imposed on ourselves, yes, and that we've now adopted without even thinking about it, is really messing us up. I mean, there's a lot of anguish in youth about what's happening. There's a lot of feeling of responsibility where there isn't, in young people, in children feeling responsible for a climate crisis themselves. I mean, 15-year-olds feeling responsible for this. And so through fungal teachings and through the fungi, I've learned to be able to teach about the kairos, about the natural time of a process, and about ecological time, old time. And I think that's really important to reflect upon and to hopefully adopt. It has to do with decomposition as well. It has a time. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's really the theme that I'm trying to share in this course, is just we need to think at deep time scales. A human life, Kairos, a human lifetime is not enough time to see anything. To close this conversation, I was wondering if there's anything you're particularly excited or passionate about right now, if you want to share about any of your expeditions. And also perhaps, I know you talk a lot about citizen science, and so talk about how people can get involved even if they are not a classically trained scientist.
Yeah. So, we have an education program at the foundation that's just developed together with fantastic fungi and Reconsider, a global curriculum, mycological curriculum that's free. You can find it on fungieducation.org, and you can enroll and get webinars for teachers and get grow kits in the US, etc. And part of that education program is a campaign called What You See Matters. Now, what you see really does matter. The fact that you're seeing a mushroom on your evening walk through a forest that you've never seen before, it doesn't actually mean anybody else has ever seen it before. Because what we see, the mushrooms we see and the fungi we see are the macroscopic manifestation of a microscopic organism. Now, that microscopic organism might not even form a macroscopic structure every year, let alone every 2 years or every 10 years or every 20 years. And the fact that you're coinciding with a visible structure, that your eyes went there, that you glanced, that you had an encounter, doesn't mean that anybody else has. So you can find that, and in that campaign, we teach you what to do to make that encounter matter for science. So how to collect the species, how to voucher it, we call, and become a citizen scientist that's contributing to the knowledge of fungal diversity. That's one specific way. The other thing that we teach there of how to participate is to change your language and transition to mycologically inclusive language. You have to say their name, just like you have to transition to gender inclusive language. We have to start incorporating the third F in how we speak. It's not just plants and animals. When we're talking about macroscopic diversity on Earth, it's not just fauna and flora. There's this third F, the fungi, animals, fungi, plants, fauna, flora, fungi, that when we start saying that and incorporating it, language creates reality, and that's something that we all have to do as a collective. Just as we refer to people as they, it's as a collective that we construct that that really important, empowering sensation of diversity. So biological diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important as well. And things that I'm excited for, I'm generally always very excited about everything fungal. Some really good expeditions planning next year, and I think that I'm just going to be very dedicated to going to wild places on Earth before my youth, what's left of my youth, completely leaves me, so I realized that challenging expeditions on the body will be something that will not be eternal, that I won't be able to do that forever. So I'm really excited about building capacity in remote places on Earth for people to understand and be able to live in harmony with their fungal species, in knowledge and appreciation and communion with them. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all of the nuance and complexity you've brought to this, and for all the work you're doing. It's just incredible. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time so much.
You're
And
welcome.
I will funnel everyone in the course towards Fungi Foundation.
Thank you. I hope we meet soon and we can do more things.
I would love to. Just consider, I always consider my spores at your service. I am a storyteller. So, the service I have to offer is just, I tell stories. So if you ever need a storyteller, I'm here.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you're upstate, let me know. Do you know Patty Cashian?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's down the road. Doug Byrand, I know, he's also down the road. It's like a little
Doug's send my love to them both.
Yeah.
I'm always funneling things to Patty so that she can
Yeah. So it's a little fungal
Myco hub.
here. Yeah, Myco hub, indeed. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a real honor. I can't even tell you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
all right.
I'll show you some more ocean before.
Wow, so beautiful.
It's a beautiful day, and the pelican feeding away, and it's very beautiful.
Well, I hope the dengue fever completely leaves you and you feel
it's leaving. It definitely is. I'm back. It was a tough one.
I bet.
Rob and I trying to keep Cosmo just in the shy of the information, but thankfully only 2 of us got it. But
you never know. Sometimes people just don't catch things. I had a friend who just didn't catch COVID. He didn't get vaccinated. He was around everybody. Some people,
just don't get it. Yeah.
Don't get it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Stay in touch, and we will send you all this information and give your entire team access. So thank you so much, Giuliana. Bye.
Bye-bye.